For the last 68 years, Palestine has been subject to systematic ethnic cleansing by the Zionist movement. This movement announced the creation of the State of Israel on Palestinian territory by means of destruction and expropriation of over 500 cities and villages, and the expulsion of more than 750,000 Palestinians to refugee camps and throughout the world. This is where the Palestinian struggle began. Today, people are slowly waking up to the war crimes and injustice that Palestinians have faced. Many around the world are becoming more aware of the crimes and are raising their voices in solidarity with the Palestinians. I wanted to find out for myself why Palestine has touched so many hearts. My journey starts in Montreal City. We're in Montreal City now in Canada. Montreal is one of the main and biggest cities of Quebec, one of the most diverse cities of Quebec as well. We have people from many backgrounds here. Just in Montreal City, we have, for example, Chinatown, Little Italy. We have, communities from, Pakistan and India, and a lot of Muslim communities and Orthodox Jews and Christians. On Sundays, you have something called tam-tams, and people come from various backgrounds with their drums, their instruments, and they gather around and they make music, and it's, to celebrate peace and celebrate, just diversity. And it's beautiful to see that. And they mostly surround one of the monuments in Montreal. Le Canada est un pays de liberté, et toute liberté doit être protégée par la loi. And which means that Canada is a country of liberty, and each liberties need to be protected by the law. And I find that very ironic, because as we speak today in 2016, in Montreal, we have a big BDS campaign, or in Quebec in general. BDS Quebec is very present, and right now they're being shunned and they're being censored, and they're, stopping freedom of speech when it comes to BDS. And when it comes to Palestine, right away, they get the anti-Semite speech and etc. For me, Palestine, it's something that I hold very deeply. I think it's because of Palestinians that I've become the person that I am today. I think that if we can solve the issues in Palestine, that can help to resolve a lot of the issues that we're seeing in the Middle East and worldwide. Like you're going to see now, the BDS members have painted a Palestinian flag on one of the buildings here in Montreal. It's a beautiful symbol, and people every day see this flag. This is a very, very busy street going into the downtown, and the flag is very visible. Because we're going to go talk to an organization who allowed BDS to paint a Palestinian flag on their building. So we're going to go question them and see, what was who started the initiative and why they did that. What is their implications or knowledge about Palestine?
It's a nice flag, eh?
It's beautiful. I've seen it for a while, right? But for him
we had to redo it, actually.
Yes, I saw it.
Someone vandalized it.
They vandalized it?
Just touching these artists. Nothing serious. The first time we did that was in the summers when Gaza was being bombarded.
Okay, yes, in 2014.
2014 we did that.
Can you explain what Alternatives is?
Alternatives is an international solidarity organization.
Okay.
And we work with partner organizations in more than 35 countries. They're so blatant, they're so obvious. What will you do when you see Israeli army making children sign the bombs which will be thrown on Gaza? I mean, for God's sake, you'll say, what the hell is going on here, you know? And there's nothing coming from the governments. If the governments do not do something to get the resolutions of the United Nations implemented, what will happen? I mean, the people will form BDS. If this is a task of the governments to do that they should, I mean, they do sanctions on XYZ country for this and that. They should sanction Israel. At some point, there's some frustration. I mean, and why is Palestine there? As I said, Palestinians are inspiring people. Their struggle is inspiring.
So we just spoke with Farouz Mehdi. He's from the Alternatives International, and he has provided us some contacts to reach in order to speak to some responsibles with BDS Canada, also Amir Kadir from Quebec Solidaire. So these are all people that can give us some insight on what we are doing here in Montreal, in Canada, for Palestine and for peace in the Middle East. Let's go do that. We're trying to contact Amir Kadir from Quebec Solidaire to see if we can get an interview with him. That should work. Communauté pour la Palestine, etc. Et votre nom nous a été donné par Monsieur Mehdi. Merci beaucoup. So I just spoke with Amir Kadir on the phone. I think it's very exciting because Amir Kadir, he's in politics. He's a political representative in Montreal who support BDS and who openly support BDS and who participates in Palestinian events. So I think it's very exciting to be able to speak to somebody with such credibility and such power, how I should say.
Quebec Solidaire has been very vocal about Palestine. We have been involved from its beginning in 2007 in the BDS campaign, where we were one of the first organizations, even before unions, to support the BDS. Once I was elected in 2008, I realized how the dynamics of politics is completely controlled when it comes to Palestinian issue by the Israeli lobby. It was very evident that there was a direct link to some lobby that was authorizing or not authorizing their support of this. Well, I think it's the expectation of the Canadian people, and one of the most important principles that is valued in the heart of Canadians is simple, basic justice. Generally speaking, the Canadian people and Quebec people are in favor of a truce, in favor of a peaceful solution and a just solution for Palestinian people. Any Canadian politician that takes just a principled stand over the issue of Palestine in terms of human rights, in terms of international law, in terms of basic justice in dealing with political solutions, will just become more popular among Canadian people. But unfortunately, as we know, money talks a lot in politics. Traditional and power politics is controlled mainly by lobbies, by interest lobbies, by money lobbies, and in that case, the pro-Israeli, the pro-extremist politics of Israel lobby is very strong. The mere fact that in the Parliament of Canada there was a debate for 2-3 hours, and member of parliament from our parties were there to discuss about the issue and denounce the BDS, means it has become an important question. 5 years from back, it was even not understood or known by anybody, but now it has become a mainstream issue. the building of this support from Canada and elsewhere has made it possible since the last 10 years to organize what we call now the campaign of boycott, divestment and sanctions, which could be in mid-term and long-term a way to bring really pressure on Israel to improve the situation. Quebec people are a minority which has been invaded as a nation a bit longer ago than the Palestinians in the 18th century. They have witnessed far-reaching memory, the consequences of occupation, of the threat of disappearance as a nation, as a culture, as is the case for Palestinian people.
The Quebec people can relate due to its history with assimilation and colonization to the Palestinian plight. This is one of the reasons why human rights matter a great deal to us at home and on an international level, including Palestine.
Okay, so we just came out of a meeting for BDS Quebec. We were able to be part of their meeting, although we were not able to take any sound as it is confidential. They're speaking on issues and actions that they want to do for BDS Quebec in Montreal. So they allowed us to sit in and listen and meet with the brains and the activists and the director of BDS Quebec.
BDS meetings are divided into 3 committees: boycott, divest, and sanction. The boycott committee encourages the withdrawal of support towards companies that violate Palestinian human rights. The divest committee urges companies to withdraw their investments from all Israeli counterparts. The sanction committee focuses on putting pressure on governments to fulfill legal obligations to hold Israel accountable for war crimes, including military trades.
We're going to see Alex Tyrell from the Green Party, who have adopted the BDS movement. Let's see what the Green Party has to say about Palestine.
Canadians are tired of having our name abused on the world stage. We went through 10 years of the Harper government, and that's a government that got elected with less than 40% of the vote, yet spoke for all Canadians on the world stage. It's unacceptable that they're not doing anything about it, and it's unacceptable that the Canadian government is using Canada's moral authority to support these kind of war crimes, this kind of killing of innocent civilians and children in many cases. This is completely absurd that Canada's reputation and moral sway in the international community has been used to prop up this kind of killing. It has to come to an end, and unfortunately there's been very limited debate amongst Canadian political parties and very biased media coverage, and so Canadians are slowly becoming more and more aware of what's taking place and demanding that their politicians take action on it. And that's why one of the reasons that the Green Party of Canada adopted this resolution. But unfortunately, even within the Green Party of Canada, it has been quite divisive. The leader of the party is on record saying that she won't support it and is actually taking steps to overturn it. One of the things that makes the Green Party of Canada's resolution so historic is the fact that it's managed to break the Canadian political party pro-Israel consensus that exists in the House of Commons. And unfortunately, it's very difficult to advocate for Palestine within Canada because our media coverage is very centralized. There's not a lot of diversity in the ownership of the media. There's not that much alternative media, unfortunately. And so as a result, people are only explained why BDS is bad and why we should support Israel. But as time goes forward, more and more people are getting informed with alternative sources and learning more about all of these war crimes that are being committed with our support.
You're not touch your camera. Don't touch your camera. תעיפי את המצלמה! תעיפי את זה!
a decade, we watched Harper, completely tarnish our reputation on a number of different international issues, and Israel was one of them. Stephen Harper was our most pro-Israel prime minister that this country had ever had. There's this whole pro-Israel consensus that exists in Canada that's crafted to a large degree by the mainstream media. And I think that more and more people are becoming aware because the channels of communication are changing. People have access to social media, they have access to independent media from outside the country, such as Democracy Now!, that is resonating with more and more people. And more people in Canada are starting to question why this consensus exists. Why is it that all of these political parties support these war crimes? It's a very strange thing for most Canadians to think about when they realize the facts of these issues. As time goes forward, I think that more and more people will support Palestine in Canada and become more and more critical of the Israeli occupation, but there's definitely still a lot of work to do, and I think that the government of Israel sees Canada as a battleground for these issues because they know that if they can get Canada's moral support for what they're doing, they'll have an easier time convincing the United Nations and other countries to support them as well.
All right, so we just heard that there is a vigil going on in Montreal right now. It is organized by the Paju organization. So there are some members that are picnicking in front of Justin Trudeau's office. So we're gonna go check it out, talk to the members and see why they stand for Palestine, and to figure out also, why are so many Canadians waking up to Israeli crimes?
Yes, I've been told he said it was maybe tomorrow, so then I asked him.
We started in front of the Israeli consulate, Peel and Quebec, and after seven and a half years, first they tried to get us chased away, weren't able to. Then they threatened to close the consulate. Then eventually they moved. We also started a picket on Saturdays in front of a shoe store on Saint Denis Street, an Israeli shoe store. And after 3.5 years, they closed. But to have real peace, you have to recognize people's rights, and you have to give them justice, real social justice. And that's the solution to the problem.
Oui, bonjour. Est-ce que je parle avec Madame Lorraine Guy? Non, j'ai pas le bon numéro.
Very young, I used to work when I was 13 or 14 years old in a shop, a student work for, and it was the owner of that shop always making some collection of money, donation for Israel, because Israel was a very little country surrounded by enemies, and we grew up in that kind of that we had to support Israel because and all of a sudden it came back to me, and when I started to get more informed on the situation, I thought that's completely stupid. It's not the reality. And around 2005 to 2006, I started to be in contact with the Palestinian question, the conflict with Israel. When we went to Ramallah and we met the international BDS committee also, we had already started, in 2005 as the Coalition for Peace and Justice in Palestine to be part of the BDS movement. It was one of the first movement in Quebec, that did that, was against the wall, and we had called to boycott the wines, the Israeli wines that was on the shelves of the SAQ. Who are they to decide? Eh? Are they over the law? And is it a normal state, that says that every criticism of the state, of the policy of the state, is anti-Semitic? It's not acceptable. But we know that Israel had always a huge confrontation with the United Nations, with international law, because they think that this law doesn't apply to them because they're the state of the Jews, which is false also. And they are working now a huge gathering of jurists, judge, all specialists on international law and law. They are trying to change the international law now so that it doesn't apply to Israel. We have a lot of documentation on that. They have this status, they are allowed, to do anything.
Home demolitions are often executed as a form of collective punishment and as a means of expanding illegal settlements. This is a mechanism used to prevent Palestinians from returning to their homes and maintaining occupation and prolonging peace process. The settlers occupying their land are armed and perpetrate violence against Palestinians while benefiting from the protection of the Israeli state. Around 500 to 700 Palestinian children are arrested, detained, and prosecuted in the Israeli military court system each year. This is a violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Israeli military will conduct night raids and arrest Palestinians without having committed any crimes or without concrete evidence.
Now, right now. Can I go and see my son? No.
Daddy, they took someone, so.
Musa.
They took Musa.
Musa.
They took Musa.
See my son. I need to see my son. Don't push me. Don't push me.
Why did you arrest them? They didn't do anything wrong. They haven't done anything. It's enough to be arrested. Excuse me. Excuse me.
Continuous escalation, water and power shortage, inadequate public services, the restriction of movement instilled by the occupation, as well as settler extremism and acts of state-sponsored terrorism all undermine Palestinian right to live dignified lives on their land.
We just spoke to some of the members of PAJU, and they invited us to participate in one of their meetings, where they'll have a bunch of activists who will gather and speak about different actions and other initiatives that they'd like to pursue around the city. So can't wait to see how those meetings enroll and what is talked about during those meetings.
Mayor of Montreal, Dennis Kodaya, who is going to Israel, invited by the Israeli government and of course paid for by the Israeli government, to visit in November, with the mayor of Toronto and with some other people. They're going in a delegation to be sold all kinds of stuff.
Is he going there for some kind of military contracts? What contracts do they want to sign with Israel? What exactly are they going to do for the Palestinians? Because I think that's going to be more symbolic than anything else. We all know that when Israel goes to these military fairs where they sell their weaponry, they always say that it's been field tested. Mm-hmm. What does field tested mean? It means they've tested it on this Palestinian population of Gaza. And this is what happened with the last strike against Gaza. They tested their new F-35 jets. They've transformed Gaza into a laboratory for human guinea pigs. Okay?
There's a public assembly each month
So we're going to go and we're going to ask questions to Monsieur Kader for Gaza. Now, we don't know the questions yet. He is going to Israel, he's going to Ramallah, but is he going to Gaza?
At tonight's meeting, we were discussing the situation with the mayor of Montreal, Dennis Coderre, who will be heading to Israel in November with the mayor of Toronto and several other dignitaries, most likely to sign some contracts of some sort and to be sold on Israel even more. So we'll be planning some activities to bring that to the attention of the population. It's bad enough that they're doing it, but when the local politicians start to become apologists for the murderers of children and the tortures of children, that's not acceptable.
Maybe a couple of seats in it.
All right.
You're going to Metro?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Hala. The Canadian Parliament recently passed a motion to formally condemn BDS movement, the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement. The problem is that it is our freedom of speech and our freedom of choice that we are touching. Countries that do not respect human rights and international law need to be condemned, not the BDS movement.
One time I actually took history classes in college, and that's where I learned about the Palestinian struggle, and I was so shocked, and it literally made me cry, especially the silence, the international silence, and not only the silence, Israel is being defended. I was so shocked. But you know, if people ask me, why did you choose Palestine instead of Syria since you're Syrian? Well, I didn't choose Palestine because I'm Palestinian or because I'm Muslim or because, you know, I come from that region. It's because I'm human. And at the end, it's the only place around the world where there's an apartheid, colonization, a genocide, and people are defending the criminals.
Healthy, necessary, democratic debate. But when Israel, the only country in the world whose very existence is under attack, is consistently and conspicuously singled out for condemnation, I believe we are morally obligated to take a stand.
During the election campaign, we have billboards all over the streets. So we followed the rules and we went to the election committee and we had the billboards approved, and we chose to have billboards for BDS. And the city of Montreal ripped them off. And that's another example of how they are trying to shut down freedom of speech and democracy. Not only that, it's censorship. They want to censor it. And why do they do that? Because they got complaints from Zionists, complaints saying that it is anti-Semites, but they do not understand that most of our members are Jewish. It has nothing to do with religion. Being a Jewish or being a Zionist is completely different. It's mixing religion with a political movement.
Saint-Hubert, c'est pas pour vendre du Saint-Hubert. Il va pour faire affaire pour les marchands de guerre. C'est un nom à titre maire. est devenu notre petit frère.
Monsieur le maire, vous mènerez sous peu une mission économique en Israël. Afin de vous éviter les critiques, vous allez également visiter une partie du territoire palestinien occupé et colonisé par la démocratie israélienne. Monsieur le maire, comptez-vous rendre visite aux femmes et enfants de Gaza pour voir les ravages des attaques de l'armée israélienne?
Monsieur le Président, j'ai été très clair depuis le début. Alors, c'est un voyage qui se veut équilibré. Je ne m'en vais pas voir un parce que je veux couvrir l'autre. Je fais toujours ça. En 35 ans, comme ministre de l'Immigration à Ottawa. Alors, non seulement je vais y aller pour des raisons économiques, on va s'assurer de jeter les ponts. Je suis également président de métropolis qui touche l'ensemble des grandes villes du monde. Alors, on travaille en collaboration, on trouve des solutions ensemble, mais je refuse la prémisse de votre question. Je ne suis pas d'accord avec vous. Alors, quand je vais y aller, j'ai toujours passé des messages sur les droits et libertés dans quelques pays que ce soit en Chine ou ailleurs. Alors, à chaque fois que j'ai l'occasion, je rappelle les valeurs universelles qui définissent notre pays, qui définissent notre ville. Et puis, en ce sens, moi, je pense qu'on a beaucoup d'intérêt à travailler avec un pays également comme Israël. Merci.
Vous êtes une honte, monsieur.
Merci, madame.
We have heard that the ex-justice critic for the Green Party is in town, and he agreed to talk to us about his views on Israel and why he stands for Palestine since visiting the occupied territories himself.
I went to Israel purely for cultural interest. At the time, I was very much sold on the mainstream media's narrative of the conflict. Israel was the only democracy. It had the most moral army in the Middle East. It was surrounded by brutal enemies and needed to defend itself. It was a very tough neighborhood, all of that. For me, the next real surprise on that trip was when I got to Jerusalem, I saw the stark difference in the living conditions of the Palestinians versus those who were in the Jewish quarter of the old city, and then went into the West Bank, again, just to visit cultural sites, and up in the distance I saw an Israeli checkpoint with barbed wire all around it, and an Israeli soldier lifted his rifle and pointed it at me from a distance of about 50 yards and demanded that I put my hands in the air. So from that moment on, something in me was shaken, and I really sort of began to pay closer attention. And then came the war in Gaza in 2014, and for me that was a real turning point. I was determined to do something about it. I was the justice critic on the shadow cabinet of the Green Party. I had just been appointed to the shadow cabinet by the leader, and I saw an opportunity to take our party a little bit further. In fact, a lot further in terms of its defense of Palestinian rights. We're quite aggressively attacked in the media by B'nai B'rith and by the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs. I was called a supporter of the murderers of civilians, an advocate on behalf of terrorists, many other terrible things. I then embarked upon a cross-country tour with the support of other people within our party who were pro-BDS to explain to the public, not just to members of the Green Party, but to the Canadian public, why BDS is something that we ought to support and how essential it is for the future of the Palestinian people that we support it. What emerged from that negotiation was a resolution which did not use the acronym BDS, but it nonetheless supports an array of very serious sanctions on the State of Israel and calls for the Canadian government to recognize the State of Palestine, calls on the International Criminal Court to prioritize its investigation into Israeli war crimes. I think people are waking up in part because the Israeli government has become so brazen. For example, you now have ministers of the Israeli government using openly racist language. The Deputy Defense Minister, who was appointed I think in 2013, referred to the Palestinian people as animals and said they're not human. The Justice Minister posted something on her Facebook page recently which called Palestinian children little snakes and essentially declared all the Palestinian people to be the enemies of Israel. Effectively, she was inciting a genocide. The Education Minister, Naftali Bennett, has boasted about killing Arabs. And when Trump was elected, he was celebrating that this was an end to the era of the two-state solution.
I want to thank the Green Party for passing a BDS resolution a couple of months ago, breaking a major taboo in the Canadian public sphere on Palestinian rights. Allow me to say that the Green Party, by breaking this taboo, is reminding Canadians, and indeed many others, that doing no harm is an ethical, moral obligation. It is not a matter of charity. When Greens in Canada push for divestment from companies that are involved in Israel's occupation and denial of Palestinian rights, they're doing the right thing. They're ending their complicity in something that is criminal, that violates international law, because that's exactly what BDS is calling for. It is calling for isolating Israel's regime of occupation, settler colonialism, and apartheid until Palestinians enjoy our UN stipulated rights, which we are entitled to under international law, just as the boycott campaign against apartheid South Africa was intended to and indeed contributed to ending the system of apartheid so that South Africans, especially the black majority, could enjoy equal rights and enjoy justice.
As Gaza is under siege by Israel, many flotillas have tried to reach its shore.
In the radar, we see them in the radar, but we see also the lights now. We can see the lights.
From the Israelis, they had pictures of who they wanted, different ships, who's on them.
Yes, just go inside, go into the break room.
In 2016, a women's boat to Gaza tried to break the siege. We have contacted one of the many women on board the flotilla to ask her about her journey and why she decided to risk her life.
Well, many people have asked me why I would risk my life to go on a mission where there is risk of harm. And it was actually during Cast Lead, when all of the pictures of the children and the babies that were burned by white phosphorus, dying and injured, I just realized that I couldn't stand back and do nothing. There were 2 boats to begin with. Each were to carry 13 women. The crew was also women only. And the reason that the boats were women only was because through the discussions in the Freedom Flotilla, we decided that we wanted to take a different approach to the conflict and to show that women were rising in solidarity with women in Palestine. So the boat was intercepted in international waters. It actually got, I believe it was 30 nautical miles from the shore of Gaza. So the women on board actually had some hope that they were going to make it this time. But in the middle of the night, they started hearing the helicopters and they knew that the Navy was not far away. And around midnight, I think it was, there were 5 Navy ships that surrounded the boat. A very small boat, again, carrying only 13 women, and they knew this from their surveillance, but they still brought out the big guns, and they asked us, they demanded that the Zaytuna change their course. The captain refused, and so they came on board, and they kidnapped all 13 women. In Canada, I think people didn't hear about the women's boat to Gaza because we have basically a media blackout. The mainstream media does not cover the issue very well at all. We often rely on social media and information from other sources. So the average Canadian family probably does not know very much about what's going on at all, or they're very misinformed. The thing that stands out most about this trip for me is that the collective power and strength of the women who came from all across the world was very amazing. And so we have more connections in more places, and the organizing won't stop, and we will continue to rise the voice of women. So that really stands out for me.
We steer our course across the waves. We are 13 women here to sail with peace in our hand towards our sisters in this foreign land. sail for your freedom, our sisters in Palestine.
There is a strong feeling of shared destiny, even if the situation was never as harsh for Quebec people as is for Palestinian people, but they understand what imperial manipulation and divisive policies can bring to people.
People in Palestine shouldn't assume that the positions being forwarded by the Canadian government speaks for everybody here. And, this is an issue that we haven't discussed as much as we should have. And the politicians have their points of view and their positions that they're defending, but it's in no way representative of the Canadian population's consensus on these issues.
I always have the feeling that the Palestinian people are a message for us. They are sending a message to us all the time. When they ask, all the civil societies of the world, people of conscience, to get involved into the BDS movement, that they are talking to us by their resistance. The Declaration of the United Nations on Human Rights says clearly, that people have the right to resist when they are oppressed. And they have the right to decide of the means that nobody can oppress a people.
As a Canadian and as a mother and a woman, my message to the Palestinian people, especially the women and children who are living in an open-air prison, is that we will not give up until the blockade is broken. We will continue to send flotillas. We will continue to send our hope and our prayers to all of you.
Once you begin to tell Canadians the basic facts of what is being done to the Palestinian people, and by that I mean you don't even need to get into any controversial issues of fact or law. You can just give them the straight textbook law and the uncontroversial facts as documented by reputable human rights organizations like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem. Just tell them, what do these organizations say about what is being done to the Palestinian people? Give them a little bit of an explanation of international law. For example, the settlements are a violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention. That the public in Canada is very sympathetic to this movement and to the whole notion that Israel must be subjected to peaceful economic sanctions in order to pressure it to respect Palestinian human rights.
Countries like Israel that still in 2016 colonize, bomb, and treat Palestinians like third-class citizens. Saying that it is anti-Semitic or Islamophobic is irrelevant because it has nothing to do with religions, but everything to do with humanity. But today I want you to remember this. Struggles take a long time to get solved. If Black people had given up in the past, they could still be slaves today. Things are changing. Have faith. Don't choose to ignore. Choose to BDS, boycott, divest, and sanction criminal countries. On behalf of all victims of injustice around the world, we thank you.
Throughout this journey, I have met incredible people who share the same compassion and love for humanity as I do. It amazes me to see such human beings dedicate their time and effort to the Palestinian plight. I have learned that so many Canadians and Quebeckers, although they are far from the conflict, care so much about the cause and do so much to raise awareness. Although they face backlash, these people put themselves out there and fight for what they believe in. Many Canadians, including Quebeckers, are waking up to Israeli crimes, not only because of the help of internet and social media, but because of the hard work of activists on the ground who expose the obvious lies of mainstream media through organized protests and demonstrations. A lot of pro-Palestinian groups and organizations have also emerged and carry out many events to spread awareness and gain the public's attention on Palestinian issues. Political parties, such as the Green Party and Quebec Solidaire, now take strong positions when it comes to supporting Palestine and the BDS movement. A pro-Palestinian narrative is emerging in the general population, and I feel that the more we expose Israel for what it is, the more people will join the support. Nelson Mandela once said, "We know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians. We cannot claim to be a free people while supporting the oppression and killing of another people. Our governments are complicit in this oppression, and we need to tell our leaders that we will no longer stand in silence, that we will no longer tolerate being associated with war crimes."